Today, we become legends.
Hey, my name's Inter and welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to be doing a tier list of all of the Smite 2 changes that have come to the game so far in terms of comparisons to Smite 1. This isn't going to be a tier list of like every feature or everything that was removed going into Smite 2, it's just going to be the new stuff that's coming to Smite 2 that really wasn't in Smite 1 or that is very different from Smite 1. And we're going to be ranking them in a classic tier list format. I've talked about these changes a lot in various videos, but I've never really done a full ranking of like what I think of all of the different changes that are coming to Smite 2. Because some of them I think are absolutely amazing and completely improve the game, no questions asked, and then some I think are absolute negatives for the game and really don't improve it whatsoever in terms of the formula from Smite 1. Of course, let me know your own thoughts on these changes down below. Very interested to get community opinion on this, see if you guys agree with me, if you disagree, what you like about Smite 2, what you don't like. And of course, if you enjoyed these videos, don't forget to drop a like, subscribe to the channel for more and all that good stuff. But let's just jump right in with our first one being the shield changes. So this is a very minor one. Basically, shields in Smite 2 will now stack with each other and it will take from the lowest duration shield first. It's basically just making shields work how they should have worked in Smite 1 the whole time. It's not a crazy change, so I am going to throw it in C tier. Next up is the diminishing returns rework, which is similar to the shield changes in that it's a core mechanic from Smite 1 that has been changed in Smite 2. This one I'm going to throw to the B tier though, because I think this actually does have a major impact on the game. I will also be including the CC changes that they did in Smite 2 where they reduced a lot of the CC in line with this diminishing returns change. And basically what they did here is they reduced the duration of diminishing return stacks from 15 seconds down to 6 or 8 seconds, I can't remember which, much lower duration though. And then they also made it so there's maximum 2 stacks of diminishing returns now in Smite 2. So it used to be that you could get 4 stacks of diminishing returns at 20% each. That would be 80% reduction on any future CCs. It's now only going to be a maximum of 2 stacks of diminishing returns for 40% reduction. And I do like that change, but the main thing that was so good about this diminishing returns rework is the fact that they reduced the duration of diminishing return stacks. 15 seconds was just absolutely absurd. I've talked about it in many videos. I won't go into too much detail here. But yeah, basically you could get hit by a CC and then like rotate to a different lane and still have diminishing returns on you for a completely different fight. It was absolutely stupid, so good changes there. The Lifesteal rework, very similar to the shield changes. I think this is a good change, but it's not really going to majorly impact the game or anything. Basically, they made it so there's no longer an AoE coefficient on Lifesteal, so in Smite 1, if you have an AoE ability that is lifestealing, it will always get 33% value per target, no matter what. They have completely removed that, but they've now just introduced you straight up Lifesteal 1/3 off of minions instead, so it's like, it kind of solves the same problem in terms of like, you're going to be AoEing down minion waves and healing a ton. It solves that problem as well, but it does make it so if you are hitting multiple gods with a lot of lifesteal in your build in team fights, if you're throwing your Anubis 3 onto 3 people that are CC'd or whatever, you're going to get full lifesteal from that. So it really just makes lifesteal way more valuable in actual fights for ability users, which I think is great. And also, I guess we'll throw this in here as well. Any god can build ability lifesteal now, of course. Next up, though, we have the flat pen removal, which I have to throw to D tier. This one, I don't think Hi-Rez have talked about it. If anyone has any information on it that Hi-Rez have stated officially on why they've done this, I'd like to know, because I really just don't see this as a very sensible change. They said in the patch notes that flat pen is gone and they have no plans to reintroduce it, and I just don't really see why. I think flat pen is a great way to sort of smooth out the early game and allow mid and jungle to actually have the burst damage that they need, especially jungle, but mid as well. Like, allow them to have the burst damage that they need to actually get off their ganks and stuff like that, and it really smooths out the early game power curve. And it's just a cool mechanic to know about, being able to buy flat pen to increase your damage in the early game. I just don't understand why they removed flat pen. Maybe they have a reason for it, but I don't see why, so it's going to be D tier. Next up is pre-game passive. So this is something that's not actually in Smite 2 right now, so I'll take any comments here with a grain of salt. We don't actually know how this system will work yet. It's probably going to be coming in future alphas, but they did mention in the Alpha 3 patch notes that this was going to be coming. Anyone that's familiar with League, it's going to be probably similar to the rune system, but maybe not quite as in-depth. Basically, you're going to be able to choose a passive pre-game. It's going to be like a small effect that will apply to you. I don't really have any examples of what it's going to be because they haven't showcased the system yet, but for example, it'll probably be something like you get a conduit gem passive from Smite 1, or you get like a golden shard passive from Smite 1, and you can choose that pre-game depending on your role. They intend for them to have crossover. They're going to do 5, 1 for each role, and they intend to have crossover with different roles. So maybe like the solo lane one might be occasionally viable in jungle or whatever like that. And I think this system sounds really interesting. I'm going to throw it in B tier for now. If it's done really well, I think it could definitely be an A tier change, and if it's done poorly, it could definitely be a C or D tier change. It kind of depends on the implementation, so we'll throw it in B for now. Next up is the interact mechanic, which I'm also going to throw to D tier. This is just really boring and has like no real use in the game. They're already starting to remove the gold piles because they've realized how boring they are. So really all the interact mechanic is for like teleporters, base doors, and stuff like that. And for picking up jungle buffs, I guess. Really, it just doesn't add anything to the game, and I really don't like the idea that you have to take yourself out of the fight and completely disable yourself to do something. Like, at least with the teleporters in Smite 1 or whatever, you can kind of fight while you're on the teleporter pad and juke around and stuff. Just having to make yourself completely stand still and not be able to do anything, not cast any abilities, not basic attack, not move or anything, it just really kind of sucks and destroys the flow of the game. I think it's a bad thing. Honestly, I wish they would remove it. Moving on, we have tower bounties, which I will throw to... are they B tier or are they A tier? I think at the moment they're B tier. I do like the idea of tower bounties. It is a reward for being aggressive in the lane. It's a reward for winning your lane, which I think is always going to be a good thing. I do feel like in Smite 1 a little bit, like winning your lane doesn't matter anywhere near as much as it should, and so these can kind of amplify that effect in Smite 2 and make it so if you're winning your lane hard, you really can like come out with a massive lead and hard carry, which is kind of what it was like in the early days of Smite 1, you know, if your solo laner got a massive lead, they could absolutely hard carry the game, as could ADC, as could mid, as could all of these roles. But nowadays in Smite 1, it feels like, yes, winning your lane is great, having a lead is great, but it doesn't mean you're going to be able to like translate that lead into a game win. It's just all about the team fights in the late game. You know, you can win your lane and then still absolutely lose the game because you can't really team fight, and vice versa. You could completely get bodied in your lane and then you just have a better team fight and you win the game anyway. And I get it, Smite is all about the team fights. The laning phase shouldn't matter entirely. Like, it should be the only thing that wins you the game just because you can be better in the laning phase, but I do think leaning a little bit more in that direction is good, and tower bounties do help with that because these provide an absolutely massive amount of gold when you take them down. It has been nerfed since Alpha 1. In Alpha 1 it was absolutely too ridiculous. In Alpha 1 tower bounties might have even been a C tier change because they were just giving far too much and you could snowball way too easily with it. Now that they've been nerfed down, I think they're in a reasonable spot. I do like tower bounties as a mechanic, but they won't go any higher than B tier because they don't like massively and drastically impact the game. Moving on, we have items in general. So this is a bit of a nebulous one. What I mean by this is the general items that are available in the current alpha. You know, are they cool items? Are they fun to build? Do they fill out builds nicely? All that kind of stuff. And for this, I think I'll throw... Do we want to go C tier or B tier for this one? That's the question. I think I'll go B tier because there are some cool items. I mean, B tier is pretty average on this tier list, just right in the middle. I think that's what the items are in Smite 2 right now. They're very average. There's some absolute hits. There's some really cool stuff. You know, there's like Staff of Myrddin. There's Pendulum Blade, I think it's called. There's the new Boar active item, which I think is really cool. Meteor Hammer is a personal favorite of mine. It's like Golden Blade, but scales off of your protections instead. That's really sick. But there's also some really like big miss items that are just really not memorable, don't really do anything cool for you, don't really fill out your build very well. Like, it really is a mixed bag with the items at the moment. I'm hoping throughout like the next alphas they can kind of iron that out, remove or rework some of the items that are just boring and no one really picks up, and reintroduce more items that are like Staff of Myrddin and that are like these really cool like active and passive items. Next up, we have the classes removal, which I will throw to C tier, I think. This one just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Like, I get it, they're going for role flexibility, they're going for any god can play any role and build any item, and it's really like what you make of it in Smite 2, which I do love the idea of that, absolutely. I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but the thing is, I don't see why classes have to be removed to achieve that. I think you can have flexibility within the classes and still have those classes available as like a way for new players to kind of understand roughly what a god is going to be trying to do. They've also been floating around the idea of making every god deal the same damage type again, and I feel like if they do make that change, which I'm not necessarily opposed to, I think I'd be down to try it for a few alphas and see how it feels. If they did make that change to where every god only deals one damage type again, I think adding classes back just makes a whole lot of sense. I think the only reason they removed classes really was because, like, you know, Neith can be dealing magical damage, so is she really a hunter anymore? Because that was kind of like the defining feature of a class, you know, the damage type that you dealt, or one of the defining features, obviously. But still, I think adding these classes back as a way to, like, give general identifiers. You can even move people around if you wanted. You know, Alquan could now be an assassin instead of a mage, just an assassin that deals magical damage. I think having classes still in there would make a lot of sense for new players and returning players from Smite 1 just to get a feel of, like, what each god is trying to do. They don't have to be hard and fast rules. They don't have to be as rigid as Smite 1's classes were, where, like, people really don't stray outside of their class design. You just have, like, 25 burst mages and that's it. You can still have the flexibility of Smite 2's system, but I think just having a class label on people would still be helpful. Moving on, we have the god kit changes, which I think might be our first A tier. So in general, I think the god kit changes are good. I think they're generally more good than they are bad. There are a few that are just like very mid. I don't think there's any particularly bad ones that are like worse than their Smite 1 design, but there's also a lot that are just the exact same. Like, really got no changes. You know, you have like Anhur, you have Anubis, who didn't really get any meaningful changes. They changed his ult a slight bit, but that's about it. And you know, Odin, you've got Chak, like, I guess they have differences in terms of like, you know, in strength scaling on which kind of damage types they deal, but that's kind of like a universal thing. With these god kit changes, I'm talking more about like specific changes that change the god's playstyle, and there isn't really enough of that, in my opinion, in the current roster. Like, if you're going to call it a sequel, I feel like God should be getting these kind of major changes like Hades got and like Zeus got, but it kind of feels like a lot of the changes just are really unimpactful and don't change the god's playstyle whatsoever. That said, though, there are some absolute hits, as I mentioned, like Hades, like Neith, like Zeus, and I'm just hoping that more of those will come in the future, that they'll get more crazy with the kit changes and making these gods more fun. But overall, I am a fan of the kit changes. We'll leave it in A tier. Next up, we have the cooldown rate rework, which I think I will throw in with the shield changes and lifesteal rework. It's a good change in my opinion. Basically, they've reworked cooldown so that you can no longer overcap cooldown. It's got a diminishing return system applied to it now. It actually follows the same formula as protections, 100 over 100 plus X. So if you have 100 cooldown rate, you're going to be getting 50% cooldown. I think in general, it has nerfed cooldown reduction a little bit, which I'm not necessarily opposed to. Cooldown reduction is insanely powerful and very available in Smite 1, so I'm not opposed to a nerf to it, to be honest. And it also just means, like, if you really do want to invest hard into cooldown, you can do that. You're not going to be, like, necessarily hitting a cap. If you want to build 120 cooldown rate and go to 55% cooldown, that's probably about right, then you can do that if you want to. Obviously, you're going to get diminishing returns, so it's kind of like movement speed in Smite 1, I guess. You know, you are going to want to build some movement speed, but you don't want to build absolute full movement speed because you're going to be getting so much less value out of your future movement speed items after you bought a few of them. Cooldown rate is going to be the same in Smite 2, so I think it's interesting. You know, you can kind of find a balance there in terms of, like, you can build as much cooldown as you want, but there's only a certain amount you should build, really. Next up, we have the new Gold Fury effects, which I will put in B tier. This is mainly because I like the system. I think it's a really cool idea of, like, each Gold Fury gives unique effects, but I think its current implementation is a bit mid. So first off, I think the Gold Fury effect should be unique. At the moment, the way they're doing it is, like, it's your team's first Gold Fury that gives this effect, and even if the enemy team gets that first Gold Fury, when you get your first Gold Fury, you still get that first Gold Fury effect, which I think is a bad way to do it. I think it should be universal, so if the enemy team takes that first Gold Fury, you can no longer get that out of fountain movement speed bonus whatsoever. You've lost out on that. I think that would encourage more objective play and making sure you don't give up these early Gold Furies, because it really doesn't matter. If you can get a Gold Fury later down the line, you can still get access to that effect. And I think it would be much better and reward better play if it was universal, and if the enemy team took this certain Gold Fury, you can't get that effect anymore as that team, so you really want to contest it. I think that will be a better way of implementing it. And also, I think the general effects that you get from Gold Fury really aren't that interesting at the moment. Movement speed out of fountain is whatever. That could be attached to a different objective or camp, and I would not care. I think they should be more interesting. But yeah, the system as a whole, I do really like. The way it's implemented, I don't really like. So, you know, the system as a whole, I think it's A or maybe even S tier. I really love the idea, but the actual implementation of it right now is like C or D tier, so we'll throw it in B. Next up is Stealth Grass, which I will throw to C tier, I think, for a different reason than a lot of these other ones. A lot of these ones are like, it doesn't really impact the game. I guess it's similar to classes removal in that, like, I don't really like the idea of the Stealth Grass, but honestly, I'm kind of indifferent to it, if anything. Like, I think you can make some cool plays with it, absolutely, but you can also make some cringe plays with it, and it's kind of annoying to deal with sometimes. It could be something we need to get used to, but honestly, if they completely remove Stealth Grass in the next alpha, I would not complain. So really, it's just kind of like a mid-change. I could take it or leave it, really. Next up is stacking buffs. So you can stack jungle buffs on yourself as of Alpha 3 in Smite 2. You can have, like, speed, blue, and purple buff all on you at once. You can have all 4 buffs on you all at once if you manage to time it right. I think this is a cool idea. You can get your jungler to be, like, completely OP. It gives some relevance to the rotating buff camps around mid, because instead of just, like, dropping those and you can't pick it up, you know, if you have like a speed buff on the side as the mid laner, you can have red and speed at the same time, and that's pretty cool. Gives more reason to contest those neutral rotating buff camps. And I think it's just a cool idea, but I'm not going to place it any higher on the tier list because it really doesn't impact the game overall that much. It's just kind of cool. Speaking of, though, jungle buff infamy is going to go to A tier. I really like this system. Basically, it's the ability to level up your jungle camps, and I think with the changes in Alpha 3, where, like, you can level up your buff a little faster, and also you get a buff at level 1, I think this system is in a good spot now. It's kind of a little bit similar to the totem system in a way, especially in Smite 1 now that they've upgraded the totem system. You know, you start off with a buff, but then you can also get, like, extra effects and buffs as you go throughout the game. So it's kind of similar, I guess, to Smite 1's totem system in that way, the jungle buff infamy. I think it's a really cool system. Allows you to sort of maybe focus on one buff if you want to. Again, it gives more value to the rotating buff camps because you can level up your own buffs by taking those. It gives more value to invades as well. I think it's a really cool system. Next up is Warhorn, which I'll throw to C tier. Pretty much like Stealth Grass. I don't hate the Warhorn, but I could take it or leave it. I would prefer Totem of Ku, to be completely honest, or something as interesting as Totem of Ku. The Warhorn feels a little bit uninspired, but it's not particularly a bad change. It's just the fact that we lost Totem for this, and it's really not that interesting. I feel like it could be better. Next up is the Conquest map in general, so none of, like, the specific stuff that they've done with the Conquest map, but just in general, like, the layout of it, where the buffs are, side jungles, all that kind of stuff. I think we'll throw this to B tier. At the moment, it is, of course, course, worse than Smite 1's Conquest map. It doesn't have as much to do. It's not as interesting as Smite 1's Conquest map, but that's kind of to be expected. We're in an alpha. Smite 1's Conquest map has been developed over 11 years. So it's not particularly terrible. I think it's fine, but definitely could be some improvement in the general, like, feel of the Conquest map. Next up is graphical changes, which I will also throw to B tier. And this is one where, like, there's some big positives and there's also some big downsides, in my opinion, to the graphical changes, which is kind of interesting because you would expect this to be an S tier with all the hype about, you know, UE5 graphics and stuff like that. But honestly, I just think Smite 2 doesn't look that good at the moment. Like, yes, the textures are much higher quality. And if you actually get up close and look at some of the stuff on the map and some of the, like, god renders and stuff like that, it definitely does look higher quality than Smite 1. But I do feel it's lost a little bit of the style that Smite 1 had. You know, Smite 1's graphics were not very high quality, but they were quite well stylized, in my opinion. It had its own, like, graphical feel. Whereas Smite 2 just feels a little bit like a generic UE5 game. And I feel like maybe over time, they'll kind of develop a bit of a style for it. Sort of like they did with Smite 1. You know, Smite 1 looked awful in its alpha phase, so I'm not going to go too hard on this. But I feel like it could definitely look better than it does. The lighting especially, it feels really bad. You know, some areas are just way too dark and some areas are way too bright. The lighting feels like it needs some kind of an overhaul in Smite 2. I feel like that's a large portion of why the game looks so bad. The lighting is just terrible. But yeah, overall, definitely some positives, like improved quality on the textures overall, but definitely some negatives as well, as I mentioned, like the lighting. Next up, default utility slot. I think I'll throw this to A tier. So when beads was the only choice you had, I think this would have been like B tier or maybe even C tier. But honestly, I think with Blink being the default relic, it's actually been improved a lot. I do like the idea of default combat Blink, and also they've said that in the future they're going to add more choices for this, so you're going to have potentially up to like 5 choices. I've mentioned this in videos before, how I think there should be bees, Blink, Aegis, Shell, and TP. I think those would be a good amount of options. Giving solo lane as TP back would make solo lane feel a bit more like solo lane, in my opinion, and then you've got like Shell as an option for supports. And while it's not as cool as the relic system from Smite 1, the idea is that like most of the ideas of relics are going to be folded into active items, which we'll talk about in a second. So I think this is fine, honestly, the default utility slot. Once they add some more options, I think it's going to be good. Next up is the component item system, which I'll throw to C tier as a take it or leave it kind of thing again. It's fine. I don't hate the component item system. I think it's absolutely fine, but I also didn't hate Smite 1's item system. You know, if they completely reverted it to a Smite 1 style system right now in Alpha 4, I would not complain. I don't have a particular attachment to either system. I don't think they're actually that different. People complain about it a lot, but I really don't think they're that different. You're still just building into a tier 3 eventually. It's just a slightly different way of doing it. Yeah, I could take it or leave it. Component system's fine. Smite 1's item system's also fine. Strength and intelligence, that is going to be our first and maybe only S tier. I really love this system. I've talked about it at length in many videos ever since they revealed Smite 2 and I knew they were going to be doing this. It's just sick. It makes the game so much more interesting. It gives gods so much flexibility in their play styles. I do think the implementation of it could be fixed up in some areas. You know, like Anubis' 2 dealing strength-based physical damage just doesn't really make any sense, but there are a lot of gods that use this really well, in my opinion. And it opens up the door for some potential cool, like, rework designs for Smite 1 gods as they come over, if they could potentially be hybrid strength and intelligence users. It's a really cool system. I love it. It adds so much flexibility. And this is, like, one of the major things that makes Smite 2 feel really different from Smite 1, which I think is great. Next up is active items, which, you know what? I think that might be another S tier as well. I do really like the active item system. Might be a hot take. You guys might not agree with it, especially if you're console players, but in general, like, I really do like the idea of you can build as many active items as you want. There's some really cool ones already, like Staff of Murden, like the Boar one, like Pendulum Blade, and that kind of stuff. It just gives you a lot more flexibility in your build. You know, you don't just have these 2 relics, or effectively 1 relic a lot of the time, because one of your relics is almost always auto by beads, or auto by TP, or auto by shell, or whatever. Like, there's usually 1 auto by relic, and then 1 you might have a bit of flexibility with. Whereas with the active item system, the world is your oyster, really. You can choose whatever you want. You can go for 3 or 4 active items in your build if you want to. Maybe you're playing support and you want to do that. Or you can just go for like 1 particularly strong active item and fill out the rest with passive items. I think it's a really cool system. It takes a while to get used to, but honestly at this point I feel like I'm mostly used to it after 3 alphas of playing. And so I imagine by the time the game goes 24/7 and I can grind this game out for like an entire month, I'm going to be insanely used to active items and it'll feel second nature to me. I just think it's going to take a while for people to get used to, really. Okay, next up we have Hecate, which I'll throw to A tier. I think her rework design, or should I say Hecate? I've been saying it wrong, people have been crying about it. Hecate I think is a great design overall, and I'm really glad they went back to the drawing board with this one, because her original kit that was revealed really felt like it was not going to be that fun, but this new kit, it flows really well. It has some really cool elements to it with like the ult and the 2 and stuff. I think it's great. Really great addition to Smite 2. I'm really excited to see what they do with some of the new Smite 2 gods based on the feedback they got from Hecate and the tech that they've used for her. Very excited to see future new Smite 2 gods. Super cool. And finally, we have the teleporters, which I will just throw to D tier. You all know I'm an avid teleporter hater. I think it encourages bad play. I think it encourages bad positioning. I think it rewards people people making misplays. I really just don't like the idea of teleporters. Also makes the map feel a lot smaller, which is really annoying. It makes rotations less impactful because what's the point in rotating when the enemy can just follow you through a teleport? I think they're really trash. And the Smite 2 implementation of them is even worse because it uses the interact mechanic. There's more of them. They're like way off in the side jungle, so it takes ages to actually make that rotation. And I know I just complained about like the map feeling too small, but I feel like if you're gonna have teleporters in the game, you may as well have them be accessible. The fact that you have to run all the way through a side jungle that has almost nothing in it just to use one of these teleporters is like really cumbersome compared to Smite 1's implementation of it. And even then, I don't like the teleporters in Smite 1, so yeah, these absolutely go to D tier. But yeah, there you go. That's my full tier list of new Smite 2 mechanics. What do you guys think? Of course, let me know down below. Do you agree with like strength and intelligence and active items being really good changes, or would you put these in D tier? Do you absolutely love teleporters and you put them in SS tier? Let me know down below, and I'll catch you guys for another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.